When we bought our motorhome and touring motorbikes and crossed the English Channel with them for the first time in 2017,
I never dreamed that within a year I would be homeless and unemployed, both by choice. I vividly remember on that trip standing at the top of a mountain in Switzerland, staring up in awe at the Milky Way. It was pitch black and there was just this band across the sky that I'd never seen before. We all knew it was up there, but I'd never been anywhere dark and remote enough to actually see it in all its glory. And I turned to my husband and jokingly talked about running away and never going back to work and what else was out there that was as amazing as this, that we'd never had the time to see. The problem it was a joke. Of course it was a joke, because what right person in their 30s quits their job and goes off travelling? It's just not something that you do. In 2017, we were a mess. My husband and I had spent years with him being deployed, and then we'd got to a point in around this time where he was actually back and working regular hours, Monday to Friday, and I was working shifts. So I would either leave early in the morning or I would leave late at night and do a night shift, which were the worst, because then I would come back, I'd be tired, I'd be grumpy, I didn't want to talk. And we could go days just sort of passing by with barely more of a handover than our daughter, what she needed, where she needed to be, and then we'd both go off on our basically living separate lives. We just lost my mother-in-law, his mum, in 2017, really unexpectedly. And we were also homeschooling our daughter because she was struggling with school. She was one of these shy girls that slipped through all the cracks, and we were trying to homeschool her through her GCSEs, which are the big end of school exams that they do in the UK at 16. And life was just chaotic. So there is no wonder that the excitement and the adventure, and also the reconnection that we felt with a family, being in a motorhome, being in a small space together, and then having the adventures with the bikes on top of that, it really resonated with us. But it was just a flyaway comment that many people make at the end of a holiday, like, I don't want to go home, let's go do something else instead. Until the next morning. And the next morning, when we started the long drive back from Switzerland back to England, we started just throwing ideas around and talking about, well, what would have to change for us to have more adventures in our life? Nothing drastic like leaving our job, but what does have to change? And somewhere about 3 hours into that trip, I started a spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet changed my life, our life, everything, because I started writing down, and I have continued to do that religiously every month since, what our income is and what our expenses are. And there's something about seeing it in black and white when you see exactly how much your quick trips to Costa Coffee, or your takeaways because you're too tired and you can't bother to cook, or just the number of subscriptions that you've clicked OK to on your phone and you don't even realise that you're paying anymore. The amount that adds up to for us, was terrifying. What was even worse about this is that we had spent about 10 years busting our butts to become debt-free, or as debt-free as we could be when you're not financially independent. We'd paid off all our debts, we paid off all our credit cards, all the things that you naively do in your 20s because you don't know any better. And we'd run up this huge mound of debt, both of us independently, and then we got together and we worked really, really hard on paying it off. And we'd achieved that, and we were so proud that we were debt-free. But as we got better jobs and as we'd, improved in our career, we had more disposable income, and then we were spending more, and we were spending money like it was water again, like it was just as, it would be there forever. And seeing that on paper stopped us both in our tracks. We're like, whoa, don't want to live like this. This isn't the kind of life that we want. So again, we took the next step in this crazy fun, hey, how can we change our lives to be more in keeping with what we've agreed with? And the really good thing about my husband and I is we've always been really good at thinking outside the box, being a little bit odd. We lived on boats for 15 years, partly because at the beginning we couldn't afford to rent a place. We didn't have the credit history, and we certainly didn't have a huge 6 months deposit. So the only place we could live in was a small boat. And then we carried on. We did that for 15 years. Partly because we enjoyed saving the money, but also partly because we kind of liked the lifestyle. We liked being a bit weird, and we just became that couple who lives on a boat, and everyone thought we were nuts. But we were able to pay off all our debts that way, and it worked for us. So we're quite good at thinking outside what society thinks is normal. And we were throwing away all these ideas, and we're like, okay, if We got rid of the house. I mean, we only had a house about a year at this point, and the only reason we'd gone from a boat to a house is because we thought we were going to be looking after my mother-in-law when she got sick, and sadly that didn't happen like that. So we had this house that we were renting, but we'd filled it with furniture, and with that came loads more expenses. We're like, okay, if we got rid of that, we got rid of all those expenses, we got rid of all those outgoing costs, we moved back onto the boat, we stopped wasting money on coffees and takeaways and random stuff, clothes that we just didn't need. What would our expenses be? What could we save? And we had a sort of figure in mind, and literally we spent the two and a half days the driving back from Switzerland to England talking about this, and we had a plan, and suddenly it had gone from being this throwaway random comment to being almost possible that I might be able to take a break from my work, because the bigger thing that we had established that was holding us in one place wasn't his job, wasn't my daughter, because we'd started homeschooling her. So even though she only had a year of proper school left before university, we were actually doing that. We could do that from anywhere. A lot of his work could be done from the road, not forever, because he still has clients he had to go see, but most of it, or certainly a chunk of it, could be done whilst travelling. The biggest thing keeping us in place was my job as an air traffic controller, because they don't tend to like you just randomly plugging in wherever you happen to be. They like you in the ops room and, under all the conditions. So if I could take a sabbatical from my job for 3 months, 6 months, heck, maybe even a year, which is the maximum that you're allowed, what could we achieve with that? Now, it would be an unpaid leave, so we would need to find a way of building up the savings to counteract the fact that I wasn't going to earn anything for a year. But suddenly it became something that we might be able to achieve if we could drop our expenditure down low enough. So we did. We became militant about this. We stopped eating out. We stopped buying ridiculously huge gifts for people. We stopped buying clothes that we didn't really need. We cut my daughter's expenses down, or her allowance down. She was slightly less on board with this plan than we were, but hey, we told her she could go out and get a job with pleasure. And we had a goal at the end of 3 months just to see if we could drop everything down. We got rid of the house, we sold most of our furniture, we moved back on board the boat, and we blew our goal out of the water. I'm still gobsmacked how much money we were able to stop spending within 3 months. We got to the point that we were living entirely on just my husband's wage, which meant that everything that I was earning, because I was still working my job, was going into our savings pot, which was going through the roof. And suddenly we got excited. We got excited by the fact that I might be able to take a break from work. It was a possibility that we could do, and we could plan it in. We had a gap when my daughter was going to finish her schooling, and my parents, thankfully, hopefully, would have several years before they'd need us to be at home more, for more support for them. And we had a window where we could go and have an adventure for this year sabbatical that I was hoping to get from work. Except that my work said no. To be fair, they didn't say no. They said, we'll let you know at the end of the year, but possibly not, probably not. And it certainly won't be for 12 months. We might be able to give you 3. Well, that put the brakes on our big, exciting plan. And then I was left with this terrifying decision. My job isn't a job that you can just jump in and out of. It's not a job that you can leave and then go work for another company and do the same job. I have one skill, and I am trained on one part of an airspace, and they're not really transferable, and getting your license to do the job is just nigh on impossible. It was horrendous training. Training was really, really hard. And although everybody, when you meet them, the majority of people say, oh, isn't that really stressful? Actually, the job wasn't stressful. Training was horrendous. And making the decision over whether or not I wanted to stay in that career for the rest of my working life, that was stressful. There had been many things that had changed about the job recently. For a start, I'd got to the top of my tier, so I was an instructor, I was an examiner, I was all these things. I'd been in the job for 13 odd years. And the next sort of step up on the ladder for me was management, and I didn't want to go down that route, so I was almost at the ceiling of where I wanted to be. Now, I could have stayed there. The people, although I enjoyed them, if you imagine a lot of type A personalities in a very small space on some very stressful days, yeah, there were some character clashes and personality clashes for sure. And also, there were things changing about the way that we were going to be working the airspace. We were moving from paper to electronic, which was fine, except that they were changing a lot all at once. And the whole thing was just stressing me out so much that my husband was like, okay, well, don't take a sabbatical, just leave. And I was just, no, nobody leaves that job. Are you kidding? It's one of the most stable, secure, well-paid jobs you can possibly get. Nobody just walks away from that. And they didn't. I don't think I know 5 people in the entirety of my 13 years at that company who willingly walked away from that as a career. It was just unheard of. Was I really going to do that so we could what? Travel? Nobody. It was just beyond belief, except that here I was looking at the evidence that I didn't need to work. I didn't need the income. We weren't using it. We were just saving it. So in November 2017, having agonised over this and worrying about the what ifs, what if things went wrong? What if we got sick? What if the world changed? What if the list, there were so many unknowns. And in November 17, I read a quote that changed the whole perception in my head on this thing. It was a quote by Robin Sharma, "Don't live the same year 75 times and call it a life." And that totally struck a chord with me, because that's what we were doing. Every year we would fight for, a bit of holiday in the school holidays, and every year we'd fight to have Christmas off, and every year it was the same problems and the same issues. And although one of the things I loved about air traffic was that no day was ever the same because of the traffic was always a different thing, the rhythms were always the same and they were quite predictable and they were safe. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we wanted some adventure, and we were certainly in danger of living the next 20 years in exactly the same pattern. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want us to do that. We wanted to go and travel and explore whilst we were young enough to enjoy it before, something got old or broke, or it's almost quite arrogant to assume that you are going to live to retirement age and then be healthy enough to go off and travel. So in November 2017, about a week after that quote, I handed in my notice, and it was the most terrifying and yet exhilarating thing I think I've ever done. And I used to be a Navy helicopter navigator, so I've done some fairly exhilarating things, but that was just, it blew my perception of what my life would be out the water. And then I had to work 3 months, and for those 3 months, every day I questioned my choice, and every day I was agonising, was it the right call? People were telling me I was nuts. My bosses, all up to the really big boss, came in and was like, "Are you sure?" And I know, of course I wasn't sure. I had no clue what's going to happen. I still have no clue what's going to happen in my future. But I was adamant that I wanted more than I could foresee if I stayed in that career. So in February 2018, I worked my last day as an air traffic controller, and the next week we set off for Norway. And we have since travelled over 15 countries now throughout Europe. We've driven and ridden our bikes over 60,000 miles, and we've had some incredible experiences that I could never have foreseen. Sure, I miss the money, and sure, there have been times where I've really struggled, especially when you meet people, because the first thing that people ask you is, "What do you do?" And when we first started, I had a sort of identity crisis, because my whole life was tied up with this job. My social circle was tied up with this job, my friends, and even to a point, my ego, I guess, because it was kind of cool having a fun job that you could talk to people and people interested in. And to lose that all at one swoop was really hard. But I have been able to have the freedom to spend time with my family. We've reconnected as a couple, and also we were able to spend more time with our daughter before she went off to university and grew up and was far too cool to travel with us anymore. We were able to get a dog, things that I never thought we could have done when we were working all our crazy hours. And we have definitely stood on top of more mountains than I can count, staring up at the Milky Way and just feeling really sure that decision was the right decision for us. It's not easy changing your life, and it's definitely not easy walking away from financial security. But we can 100% say that the last 3 years have not been the same 3 years over and over and over again. And that, I think, to quote MasterCard, is pretty priceless.
Let me know in the comments what's been your hardest or most life-changing decision, or what you're dreaming about doing on your next adventure. I really look forward to hearing more about you. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.